A couple things to do first. We do have a few more seats coming. I see these, there are about 4 seats in the front that were reserved, but they can now be taken by anybody. And there's also some space to sit on the side. So some of you in the back could sit there, or you might wait for some of the seats to come in. Hannah Weiss, the membership coordinator of the society, I've asked her to say a few words at the beginning. Hannah?
I didn't prepare anything, but hi! I'm so glad everyone could join us. We're really excited to have Jessica Benjamin here. So 2 things. One, I wanted to let everyone know that we are video recording this. So you know. And if you would like to join us, you can pay online on our site, ChicagoPsychoanalyticsociety.org. And you can also send a check to the treasurer, Catherine Williams, at the Institute. So we hope you will join us.
So members can get CEs from this occasion. So there are sign-up sheets in the back for members who'd like to get CEs, or people who intend to become members and would like to get CEs starting today. So I might say that the great showing and interest probably says more than I can say in an introduction for Jessica Benjamin. Jessica is one of the preeminent psychoanalytic thinkers, and what strikes me, and I'm not going to say that much about her, is that she's a kind of double threat, in that she's one of the best thinkers in terms of psychoanalysis, clinical theory, working with patients, especially with her use of the idea of the third. And in addition, she's also one of the best thinkers applying a psychodynamic perspective to understanding social issues and social problems, and with her own involvement in social action. So without going further, I'll introduce Jessica Benjamin, whose title is The Wolf's Dictionary, Predatory Profit and the Unconscious Assumption that Only One Can Live.
Well,
is this on?
yeah. Okay. Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be in Chicago. Okay. Oh wait, I'm practically kissing. Okay. Wait. No, you know it's weird because
It's on and off. Yeah. See, it's not how close I am; it's whether it works. Okay. Listen, it's up to you now.
So I was going to say I'm excited to be here, and as I told Jim earlier, this is the city, if not quite of my father's birth, it's the city of my father's
Childhood, and of my anarchist aunt and uncle's activities, and many other great radical
traditions. Whoops, it's going in and out. This is not my fault, right?
What about this? Let's try it this way. Hey, look. Okay.
So, yeah, I think that the mic is flawed. That's going to be microphone, folks. It needs a battery. It could be a battery, you know. I might have some batteries in my pocket. Okay. I'm not sure what to do
Here. It's going to go in and out. I'll try holding it very still, which is hard. I like to move around when I talk. How's that?
We're good. So far, so good.
Okay. All right. Maybe I'll just, how about if I just talk really loud?
Yes.
Yeah. Just talk loud. Okay, and then I'm going to put the microphone down, or put it in here. I'm going to talk really loud. It's going to go in and out.
Someone is coming.
Okay, so someone is coming to the rescue, but in the meantime, I'll talk loud. So anyway, I can't remember exactly what the original negotiation was around giving this talk, but somehow we came up with the idea that it would be a good thing for me to talk about what's going on in the world right now rather than the specifics of clinical practice. And you know, just this week, it's like really bad again, like it was last week and the week before and the week before that. Anyway, it's been feeling especially bad. I am sure, as we already, some of us experienced at dinner, everybody actually has been giving this a lot of thought. This isn't a subject that anybody hasn't been thinking about. So this is just my particular perspective, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what Celia is going to say about it, and then I'm hoping that we'll have time for a discussion. I start with this phrase, the Wolf's Dictionary, which is from a speech by Abraham Lincoln. It was given at what was called a sanitary fair in the state of Maryland in April of 1864. It's interesting at the moment because the Civil War is not merely a metaphor for what's going on in America right now. It's also a literal kind of ghostly presence that is haunting us. And it has a large part of our population in its thrall, even to the point where tearing down its monuments has been of great import, not to mention the real material legacy. So Lincoln said, "The world has never had a good definition of the word liberty, and the American people just now are much in want of one. We all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing. With some, the word liberty may mean for each man to do as he pleases with himself and the product of his labor, while with others, the same word may mean for some men to do as they please with other men and the product of other men's labor." Of course, I'm sure he meant women too. Here are two, not only different, but incompatible things, called by the same name, liberty. The shepherd drives the wolf from the sheep's throat, for which the sheep thanks the shepherd as a liberator, while the wolf denounces him for the same act as the destroyer of liberty, especially as the sheep was a black one. Plainly, the sheep and the wolf are not agreed upon the definition of the word liberty. Recently, the people of Maryland have been doing something to define liberty, and thanks to them, that in what they have done, the Wolf's Dictionary has been repudiated. That's a bit too optimistic a statement, but still. What makes Lincoln's statement of interest to us has to do with the extraordinary ascendance in recent times of neoliberal ideology and economy in the period paving the way for our country's devastating occupation by right-wing, anti-democratic ideologues, and not only its most recent demagogue. That is, the failure of the institutionalized liberal forces in the media and politics in America to properly acknowledge and resist attacks on our democracy, to name and call out the wolf, or indeed the cannibalism of the financialized economy that has allowed all public services, infrastructure, and goods of ordinary life to be drained from the majority of people. The dominance of groups representing the oligarchic tendencies within the capitalist class was achieved not only through mobilization of the petty bourgeoisie, but also through what we might see as a fascist-style synthesis. That is, combining contradictory appeals to the working class resentment toward the elite and the same class's shame-induced submission to austerity and deprivation of social security within a doctrine of white national supremacy. I wanted to grasp why the more progressive side of our mainstream politics, especially the media, utterly failed in challenging this appeal. And I began to ruminate, and I really did ruminate, on this psychoanalytically inspired idea that it was the inability to acknowledge harming, the inability to admit that such destructive anti-democratic forces are and have always been part of our legitimated political structure. That is, we can think about how this inability to fully face and work through the history of slavery and genocide is related to the current inability to admit that economic exploitation, the use of others to make a profit, involves harming, especially when unchecked. No doubt, this inability to admit harm and the need for holding it in check must also bear on the fact that in America, the class struggle to meet the basic needs of working people has been delegitimated, and therefore, economic democracy and the social safety net are more tenuous than elsewhere, than, say, our immediate neighbor to the north. Still, we can say that this mystification regarding harming is directly related to the denial / repudiation / dissociation of human needs that do not serve the instrumental God of profit. That is, those human needs which do not serve it. For the first time since the Civil War, America is radically divided and polarized around this issue of unchecked exploitation versus human needs for freedom, dignity, security, and social belonging. Thank you.
I don't have to shout, but I feel like shouting. The Civil War, the struggle over abolition of slavery, may be the last time America was so riven, although one could rightly argue that the struggle has never ceased. In the words of Lincoln cited above, the struggle then was joined between those who viewed liberty as the right to dispose over the bodies and labor and lives of others, and those who believed in the liberty of all to dispose over their own bodies, lives, and labor. Viewed in this way, the struggle against slavery and the struggle against the oppression and exploitation of all labor, as well as the right to control our own bodies, could all be seen, although the conceptualization is somewhat loose and unwieldy, as part of one war. I find it significant that in considering the leadership of Lincoln, there is an important ambivalence. He allowed a large number of Native Americans to be hung for resisting having their treaties annulled and their lands taken toward the end of the war. And then on the other hand, there was a willingness on his part to identify and call out enemies in a way that is quite foreign to, different from, contemporary neoliberals such as Obama, Clinton, and our Democratic Party leaders. I will argue, although it took Lincoln a while, I will argue that such action of calling out the enemy requires not a defensive denial in the face of the opponent splitting between us and them, because such a denial actually perpetuates the split. Rather, it requires precisely an ability to acknowledge that split while countering it with the belief in a third that can unify the us and the them, albeit with significant tension and difference. In other words, Obama often called upon an us, or we, that was neither Republican nor Democrat. But in this way precisely, he obfuscated the split that was to ultimately undermine him, indeed to do him and us in. That is, by proposing a kind of we that had no internal tension and conflict that needed to be struggled with. Yes, one must believe in something beyond the self's own protection and aggrandizement to oppose such splitting. But one must also be able to admit the reality of harming and the fact of conflict, to notice and deal with ruptures and breakdowns of the third. Real conviction about maintaining or repairing the third does not take the form of shunning conflict, of masking rather than acknowledging ruptures. and as a consequence, failing to face dangerous opponents of liberty and equality. Now, just as a sideline, you can see how this meshes with the relational approach to conflict, which believes that in so many instances we have to actually face the reality of conflict. For many years, as the Republican Party moved ever further into the direction of oligarchic aims and corruption, the neoliberal elite maintained a high level of dissociation, making the most of the current opportunities to keep moving up the ladder of meritocracy while lamenting some of the more egregious manifestations of inequality from time to time. Perhaps it was truly frightening to face the incompatibility that Lincoln named between the wolf's idea of liberty and their own, and to realize that liberty and equality must be wrested from the wolves. And it can be frightening even to consider identifying with those who do fight against the wolves, those tattered shepherds who look a bit ragged and battle-scarred, such as the occupiers. Not to mention identifying with the they who belong to the category of other, the powerless and non-elite, the ones living in the projects. Such identification poses the threat that one might be no longer separated from those who are discarded and deprived of dignity. Let me put it in these terms. This uncomfortable struggle against oppression and identification with the downtrodden other might challenge the secure, well-situated elite to face head-on the division between the discarded and the dignified, as I like to call it. The splitting between those who deserve to live and those whose lives are unworthy of care or grief, as Butler put it. Those others are indeed not considered part of the national identity, the us, and their role in absorbing all that is impure, discarded, and shameful is essential to purify that white identity. And in fact, this fact that the identity is so constituted, in this fact, lies one root of all that is ill with identity, and perhaps all that cannot be countered simply by trying to elevate that identity through a counter move of liberal defense or even pride of identity. I will come back to the issue of splitting between the discarded and dignified in a moment. Now, at the level of experience, psychoanalysis regards as vital such identities are under construction via projective processes, even in the very moments when we appear to defend them, or in the moments when we extrude them as if they were already existing things. That is to say, in the very act of claiming to promote or deny the identity, we are actually performing the construction of that identity. So it could be seen